My son thought the security camera in the hallway was broken. He had watched me fiddle with it for weeks, complaining about the blinking red light, pretending I couldn't figure out how to fix it. He thought 67 years of life had made my reflexes slow and my technical skills obsolete. He was wrong. I saw him on the hidden backup feed, the one routed to my phone, standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m. I watched him open my vitamin bottle. I watched him replace my heart medication with something else. And when he screwed the cap back on with that satisfied smirk, I did the only thing a father who had just co-signed a $200,000 loan for his son's failing business could do. I swapped the bottles. You won't believe what happened when he decided to take one himself. But before I tell you how my own flesh and blood collapsed in my living room, clutching his chest, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from someone who was supposed to protect you. The Seattle rain was drumming against my windows like impatient fingers, a constant gray rhythm I had grown to love over 40 years in this city. I sat in my leather recliner, the one my late wife Dorothy had picked out 3 years before the cancer took her. My reading glasses were perched on my nose, a copy of the morning paper spread across my lap. To anyone walking in, I was just Walter Chen, a retired FBI special agent, perhaps a bit lonely, perhaps a bit set in my ways. But my mind was still the same instrument that had cracked 17 major fraud cases and put away some of the most sophisticated white-collar criminals in the Pacific Northwest. I was watching my son, David, through the reflection in the television screen. It was turned off, a black mirror that showed me everything happening behind me. He was in the kitchen with his wife, Michelle, and they were whispering. They always whispered now. For 3 months, ever since they had moved back into my house after their restaurant went under, the whispers had become a constant background noise. At first, I told myself it was gratitude. They were embarrassed to be back in Daddy's house at 42 years old. They were planning how to get back on their feet. I was a fool. The whispers weren't about gratitude. They were about timing. They were about dosage. They were about how long it would take for a 6-7-year-old man with a heart condition to simply not wake up one morning. I learned this 3 weeks ago when I walked into the kitchen at the wrong moment. They didn't see me. I was wearing my slippers, and the carpet muffled my footsteps. Michelle was on her laptop at the kitchen table, and David was leaning over her shoulder. I heard my daughter-in-law say, very clearly, "It says here that with his existing arrhythmia, it would look completely natural. No autopsy would even be ordered." I froze in the doorway. My heart, the same heart they were planning to stop, began to pound. I stepped back silently. I returned to my chair. I picked up my newspaper, and I began to plan. That was 21 days ago. In that time, I had installed 3 hidden cameras, backed up to a secure cloud server that only my lawyer knew about. I had recorded 14 conversations. I had documented every pill bottle, every browser history they thought they had deleted, every hushed phone call about the timeline. I also learned something else, something that explained everything. David didn't just owe money on the restaurant. He owed $400,000 to a private lender named Marcus Webb, a man I had investigated 15 years ago but never had enough evidence to prosecute. Webb was a loan shark who operated behind the facade of a legitimate investment firm. The interest was compounding weekly. David had 60 days to pay, or Webb's associates would start breaking things. Fingers first, then knees, then worse. My son needed money fast, the kind of money that only comes from life insurance policies and inherited property. What David didn't know, what nobody knew except my attorney and my accountant, was that the modest pension and paid-off house he saw was just the tip of the iceberg. When I retired from the bureau, I had taken a consulting position with a cybersecurity firm. My knowledge of criminal networks and investigation techniques was valuable, very valuable. Over 12 years, I had accumulated $8 million in stock options and consulting fees, all sitting in accounts that weren't connected to anything David had ever seen. I kept living like a middle-class retiree because I wanted to know something. I wanted to know if my family loved me, or if they loved what they could get from me. Dorothy had always said I was too suspicious, too paranoid from years of seeing the worst in people. "Not everyone is a criminal, Walter," she used to say. "Sometimes people are just people." I missed her so much. I wished she had been right. David walked into the living room. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. His smile was too wide, his posture too casual. I had interrogated hundreds of suspects in my career. I knew what guilt looked like when it was trying to hide behind friendliness. "Morning, Dad," he said, setting a cup on the side table next to me. "Michelle made your favorite. Extra cream, no sugar." I looked at the coffee. I looked at my son. I saw the slight tremor in his hand. I saw the way his eyes flickered to the cup and back to my face. "Thank you, David," I said. My voice sounded old to my own ears. I made it sound older. "You're too good to me." He sat down on the couch across from me. He was watching. They were always watching now. I picked up the cup. I brought it to my lips. I pretended to take a sip. The liquid touched my closed lips, but never entered my mouth. I had practiced this in the bathroom mirror for days. I said. "Perfect." I saw his shoulders relax by half an inch. "So, Dad," David said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Michelle and I were talking. You know how you mentioned your knee has been bothering you? We found this great assisted living facility in Bellevue. State of the art. They have physical therapists on staff, a pool, everything. Here it was. The pitch. They wanted me out of the house so they could search for accounts, documents, anything that would tell them where the real money was hidden. Assisted living? I said, furrowing my brow in confusion. But I'm fine here. This is my home. Of course it is, Dad. But we worry about you. What if you fall? What if something happens and we're not here? Where would you be? I asked innocently. David paused. His story was getting tangled. I mean, we can't watch you 24/7. We have job interviews. We have to look for a new place eventually. I thought you were staying until you got back on your feet, I said. That's what you said 3 months ago. We are, Dad. We are. But the facility, they have a great program. You could try it for a month, just to see. I set the coffee cup down without drinking any more. Let me think about it, son. It's a big decision. He nodded, but I could see the frustration behind his eyes. The clock was ticking on his debt. Every day I stayed alive and lucid was another day closer to Marcus Webb's deadline. Sure, Dad, sure. No pressure. He stood up and walked back toward the kitchen. I watched him go in the black mirror of the television screen. I saw him shake his head at Michelle. I saw her mouth the words, "We need to move faster." I reached for my phone. I opened the security app. The cameras had captured everything. That night, I made my move. At 1 a.m., I heard them creeping down the hallway. I was awake, lying perfectly still in my bed, my breathing deep and regular. Through my barely open eyes, I watched the door crack open. A sliver of light from the hallway fell across the floor. David's silhouette appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, listening to my breathing. Then he crept toward my nightstand. I kept my eyes almost shut, watching through my lashes. My pulse was steady. 40 years of fieldwork had trained me to control my physiological responses under pressure. He picked up my vitamin bottle, the one I had left there specifically for him to find. He opened it silently, pulling out the cylinder of white pills. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out another container. He began swapping them, one by one. I recognized the replacement pills. I had looked them up after I caught him doing this same thing 2 weeks ago. They were a potassium chloride compound, dissolved into a binding agent to look like my regular heart supplements. In high doses, it would cause cardiac arrest. In a man with existing heart problems, it would be indistinguishable from natural causes. He finished the swap. He screwed the cap back on. He looked at my sleeping form one more time. "Sweet dreams, Dad," he whispered. The door closed. The darkness returned. I waited 30 minutes. Then I got up. I walked to the nightstand. I picked up the bottle of death pills and put them in my robe pocket. From under my mattress, I pulled out the original bottle I had hidden there, the real vitamins he thought he had replaced. I walked silently down the hallway. Their bedroom door was closed. I could hear David snoring. The sound was absurdly normal, the sound of a man sleeping peacefully after trying to murder his father. I went to the kitchen. David had been taking my vitamins too. He had mentioned once that his doctor recommended the same supplements for his own heart health. Every morning, He would pop one from my bottle before I woke up, thinking he was being clever, thinking he was getting free medication. Tomorrow morning, he would take a pill from the bottle he had just swapped. I placed the poisoned bottle back in the kitchen cabinet where David kept his things. I put my safe vitamins back on my nightstand. Then, I returned to bed. I slept deeply. I dreamed of Dorothy. She was smiling at me, shaking her head. "Still suspicious," she said in the dream. "But this time, you were right." The next morning unfolded like a slow-motion car accident. I woke up early and positioned myself in the living room with my newspaper. I heard David and Michelle moving around in the kitchen. I heard the cabinet open. I heard the rattle of the pill bottle. "You want some eggs, Dad?" David called out. "That would be lovely, son," I replied. I heard the sizzle of the pan. I heard the clink of plates. And then, about 20 minutes later, I heard a crash. I didn't run. A 6, 7-year-old man with bad knees doesn't run. I walked, slowly, playing my part to the end. David was on the kitchen floor. He was clutching his chest, his face twisted in agony. Michelle was screaming, kneeling over him, shaking his shoulders. "David! David, what's wrong?" I stood in the doorway. I looked at my son writhing on the tiles. I looked at the pill bottle that had rolled under the table. I felt something cold and heavy in my chest, but it wasn't grief. It was the weight of certainty. "Call 911, I said calmly. Michelle scrambled for her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely dial. He just collapsed. He was fine, and then he just collapsed. I walked over to David. I knelt down beside him, my old knees protesting. I looked into his eyes. They were wide with terror and confusion. "Dad," he gasped. "Help me, please." I leaned close to his ear. My voice was barely a whisper. "I know what you did, David. I've known for weeks. I have it all on camera. Every conversation, every pill swap, everything." His eyes went even wider. The terror shifted, becoming something else. Recognition, understanding, the horrible realization that the prey had become the predator. "The ambulance is coming." Michelle was sobbing into the phone. "Please hurry! Please!" I stood up. I stepped back. I watched my son's karma play out on the kitchen floor. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They worked on David with controlled urgency, starting an IV, monitoring his vitals. One of them looked at me. "Sir, does your son have any medical conditions? Is he taking any medications?" I pointed to the bottle under the table. "He takes those vitamins, same as me, for his heart." The paramedic picked up the bottle. He opened it, looked at the pills, and frowned. "These don't look like standard supplements." "No," I said, my voice innocent and confused. "He must have mixed something up. He's been so stressed lately." They loaded David onto a stretcher. Michelle was hysterical, clinging to his hand. As they wheeled him toward the front door, she turned back to look at me. "Are you coming?" she demanded. "I'll follow in my car," I said. "I need to get my jacket and my medications." They rushed out. The ambulance lights painted the gray Seattle morning in red and blue. I stood at the window and watched them go. Then I pulled out my phone. I called my lawyer, Raymond Torres. He answered on the first ring. "It's happening," I said. "Is he alive?" Raymond asked. "For now. They're taking him to Swedish Medical. The wife is going to try to spin this. She'll claim I'm senile. She'll claim I mixed up the pills. Let them claim whatever they want, Walter. We have the recordings. We have the security footage. We have the browser history showing them researching potassium chloride overdoses. I've already prepared the documents for the prosecutor's office. We can have them arrested within hours." "Not yet," I said. "I want them to think they've won. I want them to get comfortable. I want to see exactly how far they're willing to go. Walter, that's dangerous. If they suspect you know, they won't suspect. I'm just a confused old man who can't program his own security camera, remember?" There was a pause on the line. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said quietly. "I'm not enjoying any of it. But I'm going to finish it, on my terms." I hung up. I got my jacket. I drove to the hospital. The emergency room was chaos. David was in the cardiac unit. Michelle was in the waiting room. Mascara streaked down her face, working her phone frantically. I shuffled in, playing the worried father, and sat down beside her. "Any word?" I asked. "They say he's stable," she said, not looking at me. Her fingers were flying over the screen. I glanced down and saw she was texting someone. The name at the top of the thread was Marcus W. She was already reaching out to the loan shark, already spinning a new story. A doctor came out, young, competent-looking, with tired eyes. "Mr. Chen, I'm Dr. Williams. Your son ingested a significant amount of potassium chloride. We were able to stabilize him, but we need to know where he got this substance. The police are going to want to ask questions." Michelle's head snapped up. "Police? It's standard procedure when we see a potential poisoning," Dr. Williams said. "The concentration in his system was too high to be accidental." Michelle stood up. Her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. Then she looked at me, and I saw the exact moment when she decided to sacrifice me. "It was him," she said, pointing at me. "My father-in-law. He's been confused lately. He keeps mixing up his pills. He must have put something in David's vitamins by mistake." The doctor looked at me. I let my face crumple into bewilderment. "I don't understand," I stammered. "I take the same vitamins. They're just supplements." The doctor said they were good for the heart. "He has dementia," Michelle pressed on. "We've been trying to get him help. We were looking at assisted living facilities. He refuses to go. He's in denial about how bad it's getting." The doctor frowned. "Sir, do you know what day it is?" "Thursday," I said. "It was Thursday, December 11th. And do you know where you are?" "Swedish Medical Center. My son is here because he had some kind of episode. I don't understand what's happening." The doctor made a note on his clipboard. He wasn't convinced by Michelle's story, but he wasn't dismissing it either. This was the gray zone they were counting on. Confusion, reasonable doubt, a plausible explanation that would make everything go away. 2 police officers arrived about an hour later. They asked questions. Michelle gave her statement first. I could hear her through the door, crying, explaining how I had been deteriorating for months, how they had been trying to get me help, how this was all a terrible accident caused by my failing mind. Then they came to me. I sat in the plastic chair, my hands folded in my lap, the picture of a bewildered elderly man. I answered their questions slowly, with appropriate confusion. "Mr. Chen, can you tell us what happened this morning?" I was reading my paper. David was making breakfast. Then I heard a crash. He was on the floor. Michelle was screaming. I called for help. "Did I do something wrong? Your daughter-in-law says you might have mixed up some medications." "I don't think so. I'm very careful with my pills. Dorothy, my wife, she always laid them out for me before she passed. Now I use one of those plastic organizers with the days on it." The officer nodded, writing in his notepad. He didn't look at me like I was a criminal. He looked at me like I was a victim, an old man caught in a terrible situation. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Chen. In the meantime, you're free to go." I nodded. I thanked them. I walked out of the hospital. The game was just beginning. Over the next 3 days, David recovered in the hospital. Michelle moved back into my house, ostensibly to take care of me, but really to search for anything valuable. I watched her on the hidden cameras, rifling through my filing cabinets, checking behind picture frames, even tapping on walls looking for a safe. She found nothing, because there was nothing to find. My real assets were held in accounts under a trust managed by Raymond. The house was mortgaged, the pension was modest, and the checking account had just enough to maintain the illusion of comfortable retirement. On the 3rd night, I heard her on the phone with Marcus Webb. "I need more time," she was pleading. "David's in the hospital. The old man is useless. There's nothing here." A pause. She was listening to something that made her face go pale. "A week, please. 1 more week. We'll figure something out." Another pause. She closed her eyes. "I understand. Yes, I understand what happens if we don't." She hung up. She stood in my kitchen, in the house I had built with my wife, and she started to cry. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she wiped her eyes, composed her face, and walked into the living room where I was pretending to doze in my chair. "Dad," she said sweetly, "I need to talk to you about something important." I blinked awake with theatrical slowness. What is it, dear? The doctors said David needs specialized care when he gets out, a cardiac rehabilitation program. It's expensive. We were wondering if you might have any savings you could help us with. Maybe an old account you forgot about? A safety deposit box? She was fishing, desperately. I told you, Michelle, I said slowly. Everything I have is in this house, and my pension. Dorothy and I were never big savers. We lived on what we had. Her jaw tightened. Nothing at all? No investments? No stocks? I was a government employee, dear. We don't get rich working for the FBI. She forced a smile. Of course. I'm sorry. I'm just so worried about David. I know you are. She walked away. I heard her make another call, her voice hushed and angry. That night, I made my final preparations. At midnight, I heard my bedroom door open. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed. Footsteps approached the bed. 2 sets this time. David had been released that afternoon, weak but walking. They stood over me in the darkness. I could smell Michelle's perfume and David's sweat. He's out, Michelle whispered. Are you sure about this? David asked. His voice was shaking. The near-death experience had rattled him, but apparently not enough to change his course. We don't have a choice, Marcus called again. If we don't have something by Monday, he's sending people. This is the only way. The pillow? It's quick. With his heart condition, everyone will assume it just gave out. We say we found him in the morning. Natural causes. I felt the weight of them leaning over me. I felt the shift in the air as something soft was lifted above my face. Now, I opened my eyes and sat up. My hand shot out and grabbed David's wrist with a grip that surprised both of them. I wasn't as weak as they thought. Did you really think I wouldn't know? I said. Michelle screamed. David tried to pull away, but I held on. With my other hand, I hit the switch on my nightstand. The lights blazed on. They saw themselves as I had seen them for weeks. Murderers, conspirators, strangers wearing the faces of family. Dad, wait, David started. Don't. My voice was ice. Don't say another word. I have cameras in every room of this house. I have recordings of every conversation you've had about killing me. I have footage of you tampering with my medication. I have evidence of your communications with Marcus Webb. I have everything. Michelle's face went white. You can't. The camera was broken. You said, I said a lot of things. You believed all of them because you wanted to believe I was a senile old man waiting to die. But I spent 40 years catching people smarter than you two. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my own son trying to murder me? David sank down onto the edge of my bed. His face crumpled. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't want to. Marcus, he was going to kill us. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. So you decided to kill me instead. The money, he sobbed. I thought if you were gone, we could sell the house, access your accounts, pay him off. I didn't want this. I swear I didn't want this. You came into my room with a pillow, David. You were going to suffocate me in my sleep. Your mother's ashes are in the urn on that shelf. She would have watched you murder me. He broke down completely, crying like the child he had once been. But I felt nothing. The son I had raised was gone. This was someone else. Something else. What happens now? Michelle asked. Her voice was cold, calculated. She was already thinking about damage control. Now, I said, you wait. I pulled out my phone and dialed Raymond. Bring them in, I said. 15 minutes later, there were police cars in my driveway. Officers filled my house. David and Michelle were handcuffed and read their rights. I sat in my recliner and gave my statement calmly, professionally, with the precision of someone who had been on the other side of the interrogation table many times. I handed over the hard drive with all the recordings. I showed them the pill bottles, properly labeled and stored as evidence. I gave them the timeline, the motive, the financial connections to Marcus Webb. As they led David out the front door, he looked back at me one last time. Dad, he said, I'm your son. You were my son, I replied. The moment you decided to kill me for money, you stopped being anything at all. The door closed. The red and blue lights faded. The house was quiet. I sat in the silence for a long time. staring at the chair where Dorothy used to sit. I had protected myself. I had won, but the victory felt hollow, like biting into a beautiful apple and finding it rotten at the core. The trial was 6 months later. David was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and poisoning. Michelle was charged as an accomplice. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings played in court, every whispered conversation about timelines and dosages and how to make it look natural. David's lawyer tried to paint me as an unreliable witness, an aging man with a grudge against his own family. But the forensic evidence didn't lie. The pills didn't lie. The cameras didn't lie. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. David was sentenced to 25 years. Michelle got 18 as an accessory. As the judge read the verdict, I sat in the gallery and watched my son's face. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, empty, hollow, the same way I felt. After the sentencing, I went to see them one last time. The visiting room at the county jail was cold and institutional, all concrete and bulletproof glass. David sat on the other side of the partition. He had aged 10 years and 6 months. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. "You came," he said. "I came to tell you something." I picked up the phone receiver. "Something you should know before you spend the next quarter century in there." "What? The money you were trying to kill me for? The house, the pension, the life insurance? It's gone." He blinked. "What do you mean, gone?" "I donated all of it. Every cent. The proceeds from selling the house, my retirement accounts, everything. Half went to a fund for victims of elder abuse. Half went to a debt relief charity that helps families escape predatory lenders like Marcus Webb." His mouth fell open. "You gave it all away?" $8 million, David. That's what I had. That's what you would have inherited if you had just been patient. If you had just loved me. Your mother and I spent our whole lives building that nest egg, planning to leave it to you, and you threw it away for a loan shark and a desperate scheme." The color drained from his face. $8 million? You murdered your father for an inheritance that doesn't exist anymore. You're going to spend 25 years in prison for nothing. He started to shake. "Dad, please. I didn't know. I didn't know there was that much. You thought I was a poor old man with a house and a pension. You thought you were entitled to whatever I had. You thought you could speed up the timeline." I stood up. I placed my hand against the glass one last time. "Goodbye, David. I won't be coming back." I walked out of the jail. The Seattle sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time in weeks. I stood on the sidewalk and let it warm my face. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. Raymond was driving. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." I climbed in. In the back seat was a single suitcase and a one-way ticket to Arizona. I had bought a small house in Sedona, surrounded by red rocks and clear skies. A place where the rain didn't remind me of 40 years of loss. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the jail. I didn't look back at the city where I had raised a family and buried a wife, and nearly died at the hands of my own child. I looked forward, at the road stretching out toward the horizon, at the rest of my life, however many years I had left. They say blood is thicker than water. But I learned that desperation is an acid that dissolves every bond. For decades, I had believed that providing for my family was enough, that my silence about my true wealth was protecting them from the corruption that money brings. In reality, it was a test they were destined to fail. True security isn't the millions in the bank. It's knowing who you can trust when everything is stripped away. If you're sitting at a table where the people who should love you are calculating your death, don't wait for them to make their move. Make yours first. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself, tell me your story in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe to Obsidian Vengeance for more stories of justice and survival.